Welcome, you've arrived. Not by accident, but perhaps by a quiet whisper from within. Here, you may rest. Here, you do not need to strive. This is the empty boat, a place adrift between breath and silence, where ancient Zen stories and modern healing gently meet, like moonlight dancing on a quiet pond. The world outside may be loud, restless, rushing towards something unseen, but within these stories, there is no rush, no need to become, no need to fix, only the invitation to soften, to return, to remember. Each tale you'll hear is more than a story. It is a doorway into stillness, into wonder, into that place within you that has always known how to let go. Through the whisper of monks and old lanterns, through windswept temples and forgotten gardens, through wounds carried and hearts reopening, these 25 stories will guide you home, not to a destination, but to presence. So find a quiet space, let your shoulders drop, let your breath deepen, let the day fall away. We begin now with the first story. The bamboo that bends. Story 1. The bamboo that bends. It was the coldest morning of early spring when the novice monk Rio opened the creaking gate to the old monastery at the foot of Mount Suru. His robes were damp from walking through the mist, and his breath formed delicate clouds that vanished as quickly as they came. He had walked for days, leaving behind the world he no longer understood. A world of deadlines, glowing screens, broken promises, and an endless feeling of not being enough. In his heart, he carried the heaviness of a single question. How do I let go of control? It had haunted him like a shadow. The desire to hold on to the past, to people, to plans that never unfolded the way he wanted, had left him exhausted. His therapist had told him to meditate. His friends told him to go on vacation, but none of it had softened the grip inside his chest. And so, here he was, barefoot in the snow-melt morning, bowing to the elder monk at the gate, asking not for answers, only silence. The abbot, a man so old that the folds of his face looked carved by time itself, said nothing. He simply bowed in return, handed Rio a straw broom, and pointed toward the bamboo grove at the edge of the temple. And so, without instruction, Rio swept, for days, then weeks, then months. He swept fallen leaves in the early light. He swept petals in the wind. He swept snowflakes as they fell, only to be covered again. No one told him what to seek. No one gave him a mantra or a lecture. The silence was his only companion, along with the sound of the bamboo creaking gently in the wind. One evening, as spring turned to summer, Rio stood beneath the largest stalk in the grove. A storm had come through the previous night. The wind was violent, the sky dark. Yet not a single bamboo had broken. They had bent low, almost to the ground, and returned once the storm passed. He turned to the abbot, who had appeared beside him without a sound. "Master," Rio said softly, "why is it that the bamboo does not break?" The abbot looked at the young monk. His eyes were the colour of river stones, calm and clear. He reached out and gently tapped the bamboo stalk. "Because it does not resist the wind," he said. "It does not try to hold itself up. It bows, it yields, and in doing so, it endures." Rio was silent. Something inside him trembled. "But if it lets go completely, won't it fall?" he asked. "If I let go of control, what will become of me?" The abbot smiled. You do not vanish when you yield. You return, softer, wiser, freer. Letting go is not the end of you, child. It is the beginning. That night, Rio sat under the moon in the grove. He watched the bamboos sway with the breeze, each one dancing its silent prayer. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to fix himself. He didn't need to reach, to force, to resist. He placed his hands on his lap. He breathed. He let go, and nothing broke. In fact, something opened. Zen reflection. In Zen, the image of bamboo is not just botanical. It is a mirror of awakened life. It is hollow, empty, like the mind free of grasping. It is flexible, able to bow low without losing strength. It is rooted, connected deeply to the earth even as it moves with the sky. We spend much of our lives bracing against the wind, trying to stay upright, rigid, holding ourselves together with sheer will. But the truth is, it's the rigid tree that snaps while the bamboo bends and lives. The Buddha taught the middle way, not of indulgence or denial, but of flow, presence, and humility. To let go is not to fall apart. It is to trust impermanence and to realize we are not the doers of everything, but participants in something vast and mysterious. Control is a dream. Presence is real. Psychological insight. In modern psychology, especially in trauma recovery and mindfulness-based therapies, the need for control is often a coping strategy, an armor we develop to protect ourselves from uncertainty, pain, or abandonment. People who grow up in chaotic or emotionally unstable environments often learn that control equals safety. Control becomes the illusion of power over what is unpredictable. But control, when rigid, becomes a cage. It causes chronic anxiety. What if this goes wrong? Burnout. I have to hold everything together. Perfectionism. If I make a mistake, it all falls apart. Fear of intimacy. If I open up, I lose control. Letting go, in therapeutic language, is not passive. It's an act of surrender that comes from trusting the present, our own nervous system, and the impermanence of emotions. Rio's story is not unique. We all sweep our own flaws, trying to make order out of chaos. But the real shift happens when we stop fighting the storm and learn to bend with it. Meditative closing tonight. Ask yourself, where am I trying to control life? What would it feel like to trust instead of tense? Sit somewhere quiet. Breathe in slowly. Let your exhale be a release of your shoulders, your expectations, your past. Picture yourself as bamboo, rooted, soft, alive, able to yield without losing who you are. The Buddha once said, "You only lose what you cling to." So perhaps the freedom you seek is not in holding on, but in the gentle art of bowing to what is. And when the wind comes, let it move through you. You will not break. You will return, softer, stronger, free. Story 2. The monk who fed the fire. In the mountains of northern Japan, where the winters hung like a long breath over the land, there lived an old monk named Kaito. He was the keeper of the fire, the one responsible for tending the sacred flame that warmed the meditation hall and lit the path for the novices when the sun disappeared early behind snow clouds. Kaito rarely spoke. His days were quiet, sweeping ashes, chopping wood, kneeling by the fire pit. But there was one thing every monk in the monastery knew. No one disturbed Kaito when he was tending the fire. They said he had once been a man of fierce anger. That Long ago, before he donned the grey robe and shaved his head, Kaito had nearly killed someone in a fit of rage, a rival in the village, a betrayal. The details were scattered like broken pottery. What mattered now was that Kaito never raised his voice, not even when the young monks spilled rice on the altar, not even when snow leaked through the roof and soaked the scrolls, not even when his own hands cracked and bled from chopping frozen logs. Only once did he speak of his anger. It was to a boy named Toma, a novice who had arrived with fire already burning in his chest. Toma was quick-tempered. He clenched his fists when spoken to. He argued with silence. He furrowed his brow so tightly that the older monks began to call him the little tiger, though not unkindly. One morning, after Toma shouted at a fellow monk for misplacing a blanket, he was summoned by the abbot. But instead of punishment, the abbot gave him a simple instruction. Go to the fire, monk. Stay there until the snow melts. Toma didn't understand. Was this exile? A task? A lesson? He climbed the snowy path to the fire hut, where Kaito was already feeding pine logs into the mouth of the stone hearth. Without looking up, the old monk handed the boy a pair of thick gloves and pointed to a pile of frozen branches outside. And so began the long winter of fire. They spoke little. Days passed with the sound of fire cracking, logs splitting, wind moaning through mountain trees. Toma grew impatient. "Why am I here?" he finally blurted one day, flinging a stick into the fire with frustration. "I didn't mean to shout. People make mistakes. Why do I get punished while others act so weak?" Kaito watched the flames rise. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You're not here to be punished. You're here to see the fire." Toma snorted. "I've seen fire before." The old monk turned his head slowly. His eyes were neither soft nor stern. They were clear, like glass before it's blown into shape. "Then you've only seen what it does, not what it is." And he fell silent again. The days grew colder. The logs burned hotter. Toma chopped, carried, and tended. And he watched. He watched the way dry wood ignited quickly, flaring up, consuming itself in seconds. He noticed how wet logs hissed and spit, filling the room with smoke. He began to see how some embers, buried beneath ash, still glowed hours after the fire seemed dead, and how feeding too much wood at once made the fire choke, suffocate, collapse. The fire, he realized, was alive, and so was his anger. One night, as wind screamed outside and snow piled high against the walls, Kaito invited Toma to sit beside him. The fire blazed low and steady, warm, golden, breathing. The old monk reached into the ashes and pulled out a half-burnt piece of wood. This was a green branch, he said. It burned poorly. Why? Toma hesitated. Because it wasn't ready? Kaito nodded. When we're young, our anger is green, raw, wet. We don't know how to burn it clean. So it smokes. It blinds. It hurts. But if we learn to tend it, to feed it slowly, to sit with it instead of throwing it at others, he placed the branch back into the fire. It began to glow. Even anger can become light. Zen reflection. Zen does not ask us to deny our emotions. It asks us to see them clearly, without becoming them. Anger, like fire, is not evil. It is energy. It is a signal. It is heat. But when untended, it burns everything. Ourselves, those we love, the peace we seek. The Buddha never taught the eradication of anger. He taught right relationship with it. Holding on to anger, he said, is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Zen practice invites us to become fire keepers, not fire suppressors, not fire throwers. We learn to sit by the flame of our own reactivity and say, I see you. You are part of me. Let me tend to you. Let me understand. Just as Kaito tended the hearth, we too can turn our inner fire into warmth instead of war. Psychological insight in cognitive and somatic therapy, anger is understood as a secondary emotion, often masking deeper feelings like hurt, fear, or shame. Children who grow up in environments where they felt unsafe, powerless, or unseen often develop anger as a form of protection. It becomes armor, the quickest way to push others back, to reclaim control. But unprocessed anger has consequences. It isolates us. It damages relationships. It disconnects us from vulnerability, the root of true connection and healing. Thoma's fire was not wrong. It was untrained. Most of us, like him, were never taught how to sit with our fire, to breathe through the heat, to speak it instead of scream it. Modern mindfulness therapy, such as DBT and MBSR, encourages techniques like pause before reaction. Name the emotion aloud. Breathe into the sensation without acting on it. Investigate the story beneath it. What hurts am I protecting? What boundary was crossed? What grief am I avoiding? When we ask these questions, anger softens. The fire stops lashing. It begins to light. Meditative closing. Tonight, take a quiet moment. Close your eyes. Imagine the fire inside you, not as dangerous, not as shameful, but as sacred. Ask yourself gently, what have I been feeding my fire? What pain is hiding beneath my anger? Let your breath be the bellows. Let your attention be the caretaker. Let the fire burn, not wildly, but wisely. The Buddha said, there is no fire like lust, no grip like hatred, no net like delusion. But he also said, a mind that is calm glows brighter than 1,000 suns. So tend your fire, not to burn the world, but to see clearly, to warm the heart, to light the way for others who are still stumbling in the dark. Story 3. The Sound of One Step. It was just after dawn when May arrived at the temple garden. The fog still clung low to the earth like a child reluctant to let go of sleep. The grass glistened with dew, and the winding stone path glowed faintly. Under the silver hush of morning, May was the only one awake, or so she thought. She had always walked fast. Her friends joked that she walked like she had somewhere better to be, even when she didn't. At the university, she was known for her sharp questions and her sharper strides. But no one knew how much she hated silence, or how her body never fully relaxed, not even in sleep. She came to the monastery not because she sought enlightenment, but because her chest had started to ache every morning before opening her eyes. The doctor told her it was stress. The therapist called it anxiety. But no one could tell her what to do with this unnamed hollowness. The abbot, when she arrived, simply said, walk. And so she did. At first, May wandered the temple grounds out of politeness. She tried to be slow, but her body twitched. Her knees bent forward. Her breath ran ahead of her. After 3 days, the abbot gave her an odd instruction. Walk the path of 100 stones, but with one condition. You must hear the sound of every step. Every step? She asked. He smiled. Yes, every single one. That's impossible. Then you will have much to learn. The next morning, she began at the base of the garden path. 100 hand-cut stones laid in a winding arc around the lotus pond. She placed her heel down, then the ball of her foot, then her toes. The sound was faint, tap, crunch, whisper. But by the third step, she was already lost in thought. What if I'm doing it wrong? Should I breathe in on the right foot or the left? Did I leave the kettle on in my room? She shook her head. Again. Step, sound. Again. By the 10th stone, her knees ached. By the 15th, her mind screamed. By the 20th, she wanted to quit. But something stubborn in her, that same drive that once powered her all-night study sessions and 10-year career plans, refused to let her give up. And so she returned the next day, and the next, until the noise of her thoughts began to settle, and in their place came something else. It began with one breath. Long, quiet, soft like the silk sleeve of a passing robe. She stepped, and for one moment, just one, she heard it. The sound of a single step. It was not loud, it was not special, but it was complete. And in that moment, May felt something crack, not break, but open, inside her chest. She kept walking. Weeks passed. The lotus began to bloom. The birds returned, and May no longer walked to arrive. She walked to walk. One day, she found herself weeping, not from pain, but from something else. Relief. Presence. A feeling that, for the first time in years, her body and her soul were in the same place. Later, the abbot joined her on the path. They walked in silence for a while until she asked quietly, "Why did you make me walk like that?" He stopped, smiled gently. "Because your life is 100 steps," he said, "and you were missing 99 of them." Zen reflection. In the teachings of Zen, walking meditation and kinhin is not merely a practice, it is a return. Each step becomes an act of awakening, not a means to go somewhere, but a way to come home to this moment. Thich Nhat Hanh, NH wrote, "Walk as if your feet are kissing the earth." In Zen, it is not about pace, it is about presence. When we walk mindfully, we break the trance of speed. We reclaim the miracle of the body. We reconnect with breath, gravity, and life itself. May's journey was not about going forward, it was about going inward, one step at a time. Psychological insight in modern life. Chronic dissociation is common. We rush, we multitask, we eat without tasting, we speak without listening, we walk without noticing. The ground beneath us. This disconnection fuels anxiety, burnout, and a sense of life passing by. Mindful walking is a scientifically supported practice that reduces cortisol, stress hormone, regulates breathing and heart rate grounds. The nervous system increases emotional regulation. For people with trauma, anxiety, or depression, walking meditation can be a gentle way to reconnect with the body without the intensity of seated stillness. May's tension wasn't just physical. It was the result of years of living ahead of herself, always chasing the next goal, avoiding the stillness where her fears hid. But when she returned to her step, her breath, her moment, healing began. The path was always there. She had simply not walked it. Meditative closing tonight. Give yourself a gift. Find a quiet space, a hallway, a garden, a patch of earth. Take off your shoes if you can. Begin walking slowly. Feel each foot rise, each heel touch, each toe press. Let the sound of your steps be a bell, and ask gently, "Where have I been rushing? Which parts of my life have I walked past without noticing? Let each step be a prayer, a kiss to the earth, a coming home. The Buddha walked for 45 years after his enlightenment. Not in a hurry, not to escape, but to be fully present. With each footfall, with each person, with each breath. May you walk that way too. One step, one sound, one life. Story 4. The teacup was already full. There was a scholar who came to see the Zen master. He had crossed mountains and rivers, left behind students and scrolls, all to sit at the feet of the teacher known only as Master Haku, whose silence was said to cut through confusion like moonlight through clouds. The scholar's name was Isamu. He was proud, not of wealth or power, but of knowledge. He had studied scriptures, debated in temples, memorized entire sutras by heart, and yet something inside him remained unsettled. His mind, though brilliant, never rested. Even while meditating, it searched. Even while breathing, it calculated. Even while praying, it whispered questions like leaves rustling in the night. He believed he was ready for enlightenment. But what he received instead was tea. Master Haku welcomed him kindly. He said nothing of the scholar's reputation, nor of the heavy books he carried in his satchel. Instead, he gestured for Isamu to sit on the veranda that overlooked the moss garden. "Would you like some tea?" the master asked with a smile. Isamu bowed politely. "Yes, master. But I have also come with questions." The master poured the tea. The liquid flowed gently into the small clay cup. The steam rose like incense, but the master did not stop pouring. The tea reached the brim, and then it overflowed. Down the sides, onto the wooden tray, onto Isamu's robes. Startled, Isamu gasped, "Master, the cup is full." Haku looked at him calmly, then spoke. "Yes, like your mind. How can I offer you anything if you are already full?" That evening, Isamu sat alone, in the garden, his books beside him unopened. He watched a spider spin its web between two bamboo poles. He listened to the frogs croak in the lotus pond. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand. His years of accumulation, knowledge, status, spiritual vocabulary had become walls. He had confused knowing with being. And now, he saw the difference. That night, he did not write in his journal. He simply listened to the silence as if it were a scripture spoken by the moon. Zen reflection. In Zen, emptiness is not lack. It is space. Space for insight. Space for truth. Space for the present moment to arrive without interference. The mind that is already full of opinions, judgments, attachments cannot receive. The teacup metaphor is one of the most enduring in Zen teachings. It reminds us, if you seek to fill the self with wisdom, first empty the self of self. This emptiness is not nihilistic. It is not void. It is openness, like a sky that allows clouds to pass. When Isamu tried to approach the path with pride, he found confusion. When he began to unlearn, he found clarity. The cup must be empty, not because tea is rare, but because what matters is how we hold it. Psychological insight in cognitive psychology and trauma-informed therapy. The concept of the already full cup appears as cognitive rigidity, being unable to accept new perspectives, confirmation bias, only seeing what fits our existing beliefs, over-intellectualization, using thoughts to avoid feelings. Isamu's state reflects a common pattern. The chronic mental noise of overthinking, overplanning, overanalyzing, all in the hope of control. In mindfulness-based therapy, MBCT, one of the foundational steps is to notice the busy mind without feeding it, noticing when the cup is full, and learning to stop pouring. This act of emptiness allows presence, emotional integration, healing beyond concepts. The mind may read hundreds of books on love, but still fear intimacy. It may memorize every teaching of the Buddha, yet never feel peace. The shift occurs when we stop adding and begin allowing. Meditative closing tonight. Sit with a cup of tea, hold it gently, observe the warmth, the aroma, the steam. Before you drink, ask yourself, what fills my cup right now? What can I empty, not to lose, but to make room? Let your breath be your pouring. Let each exhale empty just a little more. Tension, story, self. The Buddha said, as rain cannot fill a full pot, wisdom cannot enter a mind that clings. So practice becoming the empty cup, not vacant, but ready, not hollow, but open, not broken, but receptive. And then, when the tea of truth comes, you will taste it, and it will nourish not just your mind, but your whole being. Story 5. Clouds over the lake. The lake had always been there, still, quiet, undemanding. Long before the monastery was built on its northern shore, long before the walking trails curved around its edges, the lake had rested like a great mirror, beneath the sky, reflecting whatever passed above it. Clouds, moonlight, birds, thunder. But for Hana, the lake had become more than a place. It was her teacher and her sanctuary. When she arrived at the temple, her eyes were shadowed with the weight of years spent running from herself. She had been a teacher in the city, brilliant, composed, capable, until one day she couldn't get out of bed. Not for class, not for food, not even for the sound of her own crying. The doctors called it anxiety with depressive features. She called it the fog. It began softly, like a tightness in her chest before public speaking. Then it settled in, like a pressure behind the eyes, a tremor in the hands, a dull roar of thoughts she couldn't escape. Everything felt like too much, even brushing her teeth or deciding what to eat. She came to the temple not for answers, but for stillness. And for weeks, she didn't speak to anyone. She only sat by the lake. At first, she judged herself for it. She should be meditating. She should be studying. She should be healing faster. But the old nun who brought her meals simply bowed and said, "The lake does not hurry, and yet it is always whole." So Hana watched. She watched how the clouds came and went, sometimes thin and ghost-like, sometimes thick with storm. She noticed how the surface of the lake reflected them, but only briefly. Even when the clouds were heavy, the lake remained lake. And then she began to understand. Her mind was not the storm. Her mind was the sky. Her being was the lake beneath, vast, still, and untouched. One morning, a monk named Aki sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while, only watched. Then, after a deep silence, Hana said, "Some days the clouds are so dark, I forget the lake is still here." Aki smiled gently. "That is because the clouds pass through your thoughts," he said. "But if you return to the body, you will remember the water." She didn't understand at first, but he guided her. "Feel your feet on the earth," he said. "Feel the breath in your chest. Listen to the wind. Watch the clouds without becoming them." And so she did. She felt her spine straighten, her breath deepen, her fingers unclench. It was subtle, not dramatic, not immediate. But for the first time in months, she did not feel trapped by her mind. Instead, she felt anchored, here, now, held by the earth, held by the lake. Zen reflection. In Zen, thoughts are like clouds, temporary, drifting, without substance. They may cast shadows, but they do not change the nature of the sky. The lake, in this story, symbolizes original mind, the deep awareness that remains clear and whole, regardless of the mental weather above. The practice is not to stop thoughts, nor to fight them. It is to observe them with equanimity. Zen teaches, let thoughts come and go, like clouds passing through a spacious sky. Do not chase them. Do not resist them. Simply return to the present. This is mindfulness, not to suppress emotion, but to see it clearly, without identification. The lake remains. The storm passes. Psychological insight, anxiety, from a modern psychological perspective, is often rooted in anticipation of danger, the body's way of staying alert, even when there is no real threat. Chronic anxiety builds when we fear the fear itself. We avoid bodily sensations. We fuse with our thoughts, believing them to be facts. What Hana experienced is what many people feel, a sense that thoughts are reality and that the mind stories cannot be questioned. But in therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, patients are taught to defuse from thoughts, to observe them as passing phenomena, not truths. I'm not good enough becomes, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. I'll never get better becomes, here is a fear about the future. This small shift, from identification to observation, begins the healing. Hannah's realization by the lake wasn't that her thoughts stopped. It was that she stopped believing every one of them. She remembered the sky. She remembered the water. And, in doing so, she remembered herself. Meditative closing tonight. Lie down. Close your eyes. Imagine a still lake beneath a wide sky. Picture your thoughts as clouds, some small, some thunderous. As they drift, say to yourself, this is just a thought. It will pass. I am the sky beneath the storm. Place a hand on your chest. Feel the breath rise. Feel the breath fall. You are here. You are not broken. You are the witness. You are the lake. The Buddha said, just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. Let your practice tonight be that rock. Let your presence be the calm beneath all change. Whatever clouds may come tomorrow, remember this. The sky remains. The water remains. And so do you. Story 6. The silence in the bell. Every morning before dawn, the great bronze bell rang out across the valley. Its voice rolled over the treetops, across the lotus ponds and rooftops, into the caves of sleeping animals and the dreams of distant villagers. It was not a sound to be ignored. It was full-bodied, rich, alive, like the breath of the mountain itself. The bell had a name, Shingetsu, Heart Moon. No one at the temple remembered who gave it that name, only that it had always been there, and each time it rang, a silence followed so deep it felt like time had bowed its head. But one novice, named Sora, could not hear it. She could hear the sound. Yes, the bell's toll was unmistakable. What she couldn't hear was what came after. Sora was new to the monastery. She had come from the city, a soundscape of car horns, sirens, notifications, arguments. Her life had been wrapped in noise, and somewhere along the way, the noise had moved inside her. Even in the silence of the zendo, her thoughts screamed, "Am I doing this right? Why can't I focus? Why is everyone else so calm? What's the point of this?" The bell rang each morning, marking the beginning of meditation. But to Sora, it only signaled the start of an inner storm. She longed for peace, but her mind was louder than ever. One day, in frustration, she approached the old bellkeeper, a gentle monk named Renji, whose hearing had begun to fade with age, but whose heart heard everything clearly. "I don't understand," Sora said. "The bell rings, and then nothing, just emptiness." Renji looked at her, smiled slowly, and gestured for her to sit. "That nothing," he said, "is the deepest sound of all." That night, Sora asked to help ring the bell. Renji agreed. They climbed the steps of the bell tower in silence. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of cedar and wind-blown ash. The moon hung low, brushing the tops of the pine trees. Renji showed her how to stand, how to hold the wooden striker, how to center her breath. "Don't just strike," he whispered. "Invite." She didn't understand, until she did. The first time she rang the bell herself, it was like her whole chest vibrated. The sound was not just outside, it echoed inside her bones, like a forgotten note played again after lifetimes of silence. The bell didn't shatter the stillness, it revealed it. And when the sound faded, what remained was not absence. It was a presence more whole than words. The next morning, Sora sat for meditation. The bell rang, but this time, she listened not to the sound, but to the space that followed. It was vast, alive, soothing. It welcomed her. It wrapped around her like a warm shawl. The silence was not empty. It was full of breath, of waiting, of peace. For the first time since arriving at the temple, she did not feel separate from it. She became the silence. Zen reflection in Zen, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the ground of being, the space in which sound arises and returns. The bell is a teacher, not because it makes noise, but because it points us toward the moment after, where true listening begins. Listen not to the sound, the Zen masters say, but to the echo, the fading, the return to stillness. The world fills us with noise, both external and internal. But Zen invites us to discover the sound beneath sound, the moment between thoughts, the space where awareness breathes. To sit with silence is to return home. Sora's transformation was not dramatic. She did not stop thinking, but she began to recognize that she was not her thoughts. She was the space in which they came and went, just like the bell. Ringing, then fading, always returning to silence. Psychological insight in modern psychology, silence is rarely emphasized, but in trauma therapy and somatic practices, stillness is considered both powerful and essential. For people living with anxiety, silence can feel threatening, as if the mind rushes in to fill the void. Depression, silence may feel heavy, echoing with pain and disconnection. PTSD, silence may trigger flashbacks or stored tension. But when approached gently and with guidance, silence becomes a mirror. Sora's experience reflects what many encounter during meditation. The mind becomes louder at first. Thoughts rise like waves. But if we sit long enough, we begin to hear the rhythm beneath the waves. In neuroscience, the brain in silence shifts into default mode, a space of integration, memory processing, and creativity. In somatic terms, silence helps re-regulate the nervous system, providing space for coherence and release. Renji's wisdom, invite, not strike, reflects the therapeutic principle of approaching inner states with invitation, not force. The bell, then, becomes a metaphor for awareness, for presence, for letting go. Meditative closing. Tonight, find a bell, or, if you have none, simply sit. Breathe in, breathe out. If you use a bell, strike it once, gently. Listen not only to the sound, but to the moment after. Feel the silence as it lands in the room. Feel it land inside you. And ask yourself, what arises when there is no noise? Can I rest in the space beneath my thoughts? The Buddha said, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes that word is not a word at all. It is silence. It is presence. It is the sound of a bell, disappearing, and you are the one who hears it. Story 7. The Candle and the Wind. The storm had not yet come, but the wind had already begun to whisper. The lamps along the corridor swayed gently, their flames bending like slender dancers. Shadows rippled across the rice paper doors of the meditation hall, and the scent of rain arrived before the first drop fell. Earthy, electric, inevitable. In a corner of the temple, a single candle flickered in front of a small altar. It was a meditation candle, a simple flame used by practitioners to rest their gaze when the mind refused to settle. Tonight, that candle was lit for a woman named Ayame. She sat in seiza before it, hands folded in her lap, breath shallow, shoulders tense. Her eyes were fixed on the flame, but her mind was a whirlwind. Ayame had always feared change. To others, she appeared calm, poised, composed, reliable. She worked as a hospice nurse for nearly a decade, tending to those whose lives were drawing to a close. She knew how to hold a trembling hand, how to speak softly when words ran out. But when it came to her own life, endings, uncertainty, letting go, she trembled beneath the surface. Her husband had left her 6 months ago, not out of cruelty, but confusion. They had simply grown apart. At first, she clung. Then she denied. Then she collapsed. A friend had whispered the word retreat and handed her a brochure. She had folded it into her purse and ignored it, until one night her apartment felt so hollow she could hear her own heart breaking in the silence. And now here she was, watching a candle, trying not to fall apart. The wind rose, the candle trembled, Ayame tensed. She cupped her hands protectively around the flame. It was irrational. No window was open. The breeze was gentle. But something primal surged inside her. The need to protect, to preserve, to keep the flame alive. Her breath quickened. What if it goes out? What if everything ends? Just as her thoughts began to spiral, a hand rested gently on her shoulder. It was the temple teacher, a nun named Mayoko, whose presence was like the space between notes in a lullaby. She did not scold. She did not explain. She simply sat beside Ayame, gazed at the candle and said, "Let it flicker." Ayame looked at her, confused. "But it might go out." Miyoko nodded. "Yes, and if it does, what will remain is the space it lit." They sat in silence, The wind teased the flame again. It bent, it danced, but it did not go out. Ayame exhaled, slowly. For the first time, she didn't try to stop the flicker. She simply watched. Zen reflection. The candle and the wind, a timeless Zen image. The candle is our control, our plans, our identity, our illusions of permanence. The wind is change, time, loss, life's endless breath. In clinging to the flame, we forget the nature of fire. It lives because it flickers. It glows because it is vulnerable. Zen teaches us not to protect the flame, but to befriend the wind. What is impermanent is not broken, say the masters. It is alive. When Mayoko told Ayame to let it flicker, she wasn't speaking of wax and wick. She was pointing to the truth that everything we love is fragile, and that fragility is not a flaw. It is the doorway to presence. Psychological insight from a therapeutic perspective. Fear of uncertainty is one of the core drivers of anxiety. We fear not knowing what comes next, losing what we've built, being unable to control the outcome. This fear activates the nervous system's fight or flight response. It makes us grip tighter to routines, relationships, identities, even when they no longer serve us. Ayame's instinct to protect the candle reflects this common pattern. Over-control as a way to manage inner chaos. Avoidance of change as a shield from grief. But psychology teaches that resilience is not found in rigidity, and it is found in flexibility. In acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, practitioners help patients sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. They learn to let go, not of desire, but of the need for certainty. Ayame's healing began not when the candle stopped flickering, but when she stopped fearing the flicker. Meditative. Closing tonight, find a candle, light it, watch it flicker. Don't try to protect it. Don't still the air, just be with it. As you breathe in, say, "This is the moment." As you breathe out, say, "I let it change." Notice how the flame dances. Never the same shape twice, never certain, but always present. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This is not a warning. It is an invitation to love the flicker, to let go when the wind comes, to trust that even when the flame is gone, the space it warmed will remain within you. And maybe, just maybe, you will discover that you are not the candle. You are the light itself. Story 8. The flower that bloomed in winter. It had snowed the night before. Not a heavy storm, just a steady whispering fall that turned the world white by morning. Every branch was wrapped in powder, every rooftop smoothed into silence. The courtyard, garden of the mountain temple stood still, a frozen painting, untouched by time. But beneath the old cherry tree, something impossible had happened. A single flower had bloomed. It was not large, just a delicate pink petal unfolding from a brown limb, but against the white hush of winter, it glowed like a lantern. No one could understand how it had survived the frost, how it had found the courage to open when the world had told it to sleep. The monks gathered around it silently. Even the abbot, who had seen over 70 winters, stood quietly with folded hands, and among them stood Kazuo. He too could not explain the bloom, but something in it mirrored what had begun to stir inside him, something tender, uncertain, and long buried. Kazuo had come to the temple after losing everything. His wife, Emiko, had passed from illness 3 months prior. She was young, too young. They had spent 8 years together, not always smoothly, but always closely. They had shared tea on rainy mornings, fought over trivial things, walked under city lights holding hands without words. And then she was gone. The hospital was sterile. The final days were blurred. The funeral was too quick. He returned to their apartment only once, packed her books into boxes, shut off the lights, and left the key on the counter. He came to the temple because nothing else made sense. He didn't want to study. He didn't want to chant. He didn't want to heal. He just wanted to disappear quietly into the snow. But the flower pulled him back. He stared at it for hours that morning, at first in disbelief, then in awe, then, quietly, in grief. Why had it bloomed? Why now? Why here, in the coldest week of the year? He asked the abbot, his voice barely a whisper, "Is it a sign? Some kind of miracle?" The old man looked at him, then at the flower and replied, "Not a miracle, just life refusing to give up." Kazuo's breath caught. The words entered, a place deeper than logic. They landed like warm tea in the coldest part of him. He sat beneath the tree and wept. That evening he returned alone. The courtyard was empty. Moonlight spilled over the snow like milk across porcelain. He looked again at the flower, small, quiet, undemanding. "You don't belong here," he whispered. But even as he said it, he realized that perhaps neither did his grief. And yet, here they both were, coexisting in the frozen hush of winter. He knelt down and bowed to the flower, not out of ritual, but out of recognition. Something had lived. Something had opened. Something had bloomed, in spite of everything, and maybe so could he. Zen reflection. Zen does not deny suffering. It does not cover pain with platitudes or chase happiness like a bird too quick to catch. Instead, it teaches us to sit in winter, to observe, to breathe, to wait. The flower in this story is not symbolic because it bloomed. It is symbolic because it bloomed in seasonless defiance, not against winter, but within it. In Zen, this is called the suchness of things, tathata, the deep truth of reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Kazuo's grief was not wrong. It was part of the ground from which something unexpected could rise. The Buddha did not promise a world without sorrow. He taught us how to live in a world with sorrow, yet not be broken by it. Psychological insight in grief therapy. There is a point where mourning turns, not away from loss, but through it. This shift is marked not by forgetting, but by reintegrating meaning. Kazuo's journey mirrors what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, a phenomenon where, despite deep suffering, people emerge with greater appreciation of life, renewed purpose, deeper relationships, spiritual transformation. But this growth is not forced. It arises only when grief is held, not hurried. Kazuo did not bloom by pretending to be okay. He bloomed by staying present with his sorrow and allowing the cold to speak, until something within him chose, quietly, to open, like the flower. Not because the season was right, but because life itself whispered, "Now." Meditative closing. Tonight, close your eyes. Imagine a snow-covered field, still, white, unmoving, and in the center, a small flower, delicate, alive. Let this image be your breath. As you inhale, Even in winter, as you exhale, something may bloom. Let go of needing to feel better. Let go of the timeline of healing. Let your grief be snow. Let your breath be warmth. Let your presence be enough. The Buddha said, "As a lotus rises from muddy water, yet is unstained, so the wise rise from sorrow and remain serene. You are not broken, you are becoming." And the flower? It did not resist the cold. It simply opened anyway. So may you. Story 9. No path, only footprints. The sky was white, the kind of white that makes the world seem endless. The young monk named Ren stood at the edge of the field, holding nothing but a walking staff and a question that had haunted him for years. Which way is the right way? Behind him, the temple roof had vanished into the morning mist. Ahead of him stretched a vast expanse of snow, untouched, pathless, perfect. There were no signs, no markers, no tracks, just the hum of wind and the breath of silence. His robes fluttered slightly in the breeze. His hands were cold, but steady. He had been given a task. "Go out," the abbot had said, "and return only when you have found the path." So here he was, waiting for something, a sign, a direction, a divine voice, to tell him where to step. But nothing came, just the sound of his own breath, just the stillness of the snow, just the whisper of uncertainty curled beneath his ribs. Like a sleeping animal, Ren had always sought clarity. He'd entered the monastery not out of faith, but out of confusion. The world outside had become too loud, too complicated, too full of choices. College had overwhelmed him. Relationships had confused him. He longed for someone to hand him a map and say, "Here, this is who you are. This is where you go." But the monastery offered no maps, only silence and chores, and now a field with no footprints. He looked down at the snow, lifted his foot, and stepped. There was no trumpet of insight, no warmth of certainty, only the crunch of his sandal pressing into snow, and the realization that the step he had taken was now the path. He walked. Not quickly, not confidently, but deliberately. Each step left a mark. Each mark changed the landscape. Each change reminded him, the path does not appear before us. It appears behind us, in our wake. After hours of walking, Ren came to a grove of trees. He sat beneath a pine and ate the rice ball given to him by the cook that morning. The wind blew softly. The sky had begun to darken with the coming storm, and for the first time he did not worry about whether he was lost, because there was no right path, only his. That evening, he returned to the temple. The abbot was waiting by the gate, as if he had never moved. Ren bowed deeply and said, "I did not find the path, master." The abbot smiled gently, "But there are footprints behind you." Zen reflection. Zen does not offer blueprints. It does not hand you a 10-step program for enlightenment, nor promise clarity with every meditation. It is not a ladder to climb, but a field to walk, one step at a time, with your eyes open and your expectations surrendered. The metaphor of no path is central in Zen. "If you meet the Buddha on the road," said the old masters, "kill him." This paradoxical phrase means, do not cling to images of guidance, not even the most sacred. True presence arises not by following, but by stepping into the unknown, fully and consciously. Ren's journey reflects a truth most seekers face. The moment you wait for clarity is the moment you postpone your life. The moment you take one honest step, That is the beginning of awakening. There is no perfect road. There is only this moment, and the footprint you leave within it. Psychological insight in modern psychology, especially existential and humanistic therapy, people often suffer from what Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum, a sense of groundlessness, confusion, and loss of direction. In this vacuum, people feel disconnected from meaning, paralyzed by choices, terrified of making the wrong move. This paralysis often leads to anxiety, depression, compulsive decision-making, or avoidance. Ren's story is a mirror to this struggle. The modern self is overexposed to maps, career plans, life goals, social metrics, but we are underexposed to trust. The deep, inner trust that comes not from certainty, but from presence. Psychologists today increasingly promote values-based living rather than outcome-driven planning. That means acting from what matters to you, even when you don't know where it leads. This is the psychological equivalent of walking through snow. You do not need to know the destination to begin. You simply need to listen inward, step, and trust the ground will rise to meet you. Meditative. Closing tonight. Imagine a field of fresh snow. You stand at the edge. There is no path, only possibility, only breath. Ask yourself gently, where have I waited too long for clarity? What if the first step was the answer? Place your foot down in your imagination. Feel the crunch, the mark. Breathe in. I do not need to know. Breathe out. I only need to begin. The Buddha said, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. So walk, not to arrive, but to be. Leave footprints. Let the wind erase them. And walk again. You are not lost. You are unfolding. Story 10. The Old Tree by the Gate. The old tree stood watch by the monastery gate. Its bark was cracked like dried riverbeds. Its branches bent low under the weight of time, twisting toward the earth as though bowing in perpetual reverence. Moss covered its roots like a green prayer, and each spring a few white blossoms still opened, though fewer each year. No one remembered when the tree had been planted. The abbot only smiled when asked and said, older than me. Perhaps older than memory itself. It was called Grandfather Tree by the younger monks, though it had no official name. To the villagers who passed by on market days, it was simply the tree. A silent witness to births, deaths, and seasons too many to count. To most, it was just a beautiful relic. But to Jun, it was a mirror. Jun had once been a celebrated poet. His words were read in city bookstores, murmured by young lovers beneath lantern-lit bridges, quoted in wedding vows and final eulogies. His voice had captured the ache and sweetness of human life, until his hands trembled too much to hold a brush, and the poems stopped coming. He was 74 when he arrived at the monastery. His wife had passed 5 years before. His daughter lived oceans away. The world no longer needed his name, and he had grown tired of carrying it. He did not come to seek enlightenment. He came because he didn't know what else to do. He had lived fully, loved deeply, written honestly. And yet, now he felt discarded, forgotten, like a book closed too soon. Every morning, Jun sat by the tree. He didn't chant. He didn't study scriptures. He just sat. He watched the bark peeling like old paper. He listened to the branches creak when the wind passed through. He placed his hand on the trunk, feeling its ancient pulse. And slowly, something shifted. He stopped longing for the past. He stopped fearing the future. He began to simply be, like the tree. One day, a young monk named Daiki sat beside him. They watched the wind blow a cluster of petals from the tree's branch. The petals danced for a moment, then fell to the ground with grace. "It's dying," Daiki whispered. "Each year it blossoms less." June nodded, then smiled gently. "But it still blossoms," he said. Daiki looked down, shame washing across his face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be cruel." June turned to him with kindness. "It's not cruel to see the truth," he said, "but make sure you're seeing all of it. Not just the fading, but the dignity, the gift, the quiet strength of things that remain, even as they change." Daiki was silent, and Jun, in that moment, realized he had just written another poem. Not with ink, not on paper, but with presence. Zen reflection Zen speaks often of impermanence, anicca in the Buddha's language. All forms change. All youth fades. All things rise and fall and rise again. But this is not to cause despair. Rather, it is to awaken us to the preciousness of now. The old tree by the gate is not less beautiful because it is aged. It is more beautiful because it stands as a testament to endurance, to letting go, and to accepting change without resistance. Jun's awakening did not come in the zendo or on a cushion. It came beside bark and branch in the company of silence. He remembered who he was, not the poet, not the old man, but the presence that had always been here beneath all roles and names. Psychological insight. Aging in modern psychological studies is often framed through loss. Loss of youth, loss of productivity, loss of relevance. But in existential and humanistic therapy, aging is also a gateway to wisdom, deep self-acceptance, emotional regulation, perspective beyond egogen's experience, mirrors a shift that can occur later in life, a transformation from doing to being. Psychologists call this integrity versus despair, a stage theorized by Erik Erikson. When people reflect on their life and find meaning, even in suffering, they move toward peace. When they resist or regret, they fall into despair. Jun's journey reveals how presence, not productivity, becomes the source of meaning. The tree doesn't produce much anymore, but it gives shade, it offers beauty, it teaches, and so can we at any age. Meditative closing. Tonight, close your eyes. Picture an old tree, its roots deep, its bark worn, its blossoms few but luminous. Place your hand over your heart. Say softly, in rhythm with your breath, "I do not resist time. I let myself change, and I remain." Let the wrinkles of your life be rings of growth. Let the losses become fertile ground for quiet wisdom. Let yourself be the tree, still standing, still offering, still beautiful. The Buddha said, "Even as a solid rock is unmoved by the wind, so are the wise unmoved by praise or blame." You are not fading. You are becoming still. You are not being erased. You are being revealed. Like the old tree by the gate, rooted in time, blossoming still. Story 11. When the water boils, remove from heat. Steam coiled into the air like a spirit being released. The small iron kettle on the fire began to tremble, its lid rattling as the water inside reached a boil. From the low table in the kitchen, "Hut!" Old Sister Anzu leaned forward without hurry, removed the kettle from the flames, and set it gently on a thick cloth to cool. She watched the steam rise for a few breaths, then smiled. "Perfect," she whispered, as if speaking to the water itself. Outside, the late autumn wind stirred the leaves. Inside, everything was still, except for the subtle sound of cooling metal and the memory of a storm that had passed. Moments later, a novice burst through the door. His name was Haru, and his face was flushed, not from exercise, but from rage. "She took my broom," he said, breathing heavily. "I set it by the steps, and now it's gone. Again. This is the third time." Sister Anzu poured tea. She said nothing. Haru paced like a trapped animal. "Every time I try to be patient, I get stepped on. I know Zen is supposed to be calm, but aren't we allowed to be angry?" Anzu handed him a cup. The tea was hot, but not scalding. "Tell me," she said, "when the kettle boils, do you scream at it?" Haru blinked. "What?" She gestured toward the fire. The water boiled. "I didn't shout at it. I didn't try to stop it. I simply removed it from heat." She took a sip of tea. "You can learn the same." Haru sat down slowly, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. The steam brushed his cheeks. He had grown up in a home where anger meant raised voices, slammed doors, and the sound of things breaking. His father had taught him that expressing rage was power, and his mother had taught him that swallowing it was safety. Neither felt right anymore. At the monastery, no one yelled, but neither did they suppress. There was something else here, something he didn't yet understand. He looked at Sister Anzu. "But what if the heat is still there?" he asked quietly. "What if it keeps boiling?" She nodded gently. "Then let it, but do not add more wood. Do not place your hand in the pot, and above all, do not try to pour it into others." They sat in silence, and in that silence, Haru began to feel the anger loosen, not vanish, not dissolve, but soften. Zen reflection. Zen does not deny anger. It does not shame it, nor pretend it doesn't exist. Instead, it teaches us to witness it. Like steam rising from a kettle, the water boils. That is its nature when heated. But we do not need to let it spill over. We do not need to pour it on others. We do not need to keep feeding the fire. This is the path of right effort, one of the limbs of the Noble Eightfold Path. To prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon those that have arisen, to cultivate wholesome states, and to maintain those already present. Sister Anzu's tea is a metaphor. Anger, like hot water, can burn or warm. It depends on how we hold it, and when we choose to remove it from heat. Zen asks not for repression, but for timing, observation, and care. Psychological insight in modern psychology, particularly in dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and emotion-focused therapy, anger is seen as a valid, necessary emotion, one that signals boundary violations, unmet needs, or suppressed grief. Problems arise not from anger itself, but from poor regulation, impulsive reactivity, chronic suppression, leading to depression or resentment, misplaced projection, directing it toward others unjustly. Haru's upbringing reflects many people's reality, where anger is modeled, either as explosion or as silence. Sister Anzu's wisdom aligns with contemporary techniques. Mindfulness of bodily cues, noticing the boil before it overflows. Delay and pause, removing the pot from heat. Expression in safe, conscious ways, pouring the tea gently. The boiling water is not the problem. The way we respond to the heat is what makes all the difference. Anger can be transmuted into assertiveness, clarity, truth-telling, if we hold it consciously. Meditative, closing tonight. As you breathe, imagine a small kettle. It sits on a flame. You watch the water grow warm. You do not panic. You do not flinch. You simply observe. As the bubbles rise, say softly to yourself, I feel the heat. I do not fear it. I can choose when to lift the kettle. Let each breath be a cooling cloth. Let each pause be a kindness. Let your emotions boil if they must, but let them do so in a container of compassion. The Buddha said, speak only the speech that neither torments self nor does harm to others. That speech is truly well spoken. Anger is not the enemy. Unconscious reaction is. So when the water boils, do not fear it. Do not flee from it. Simply remove it from heat. And in the rising steam, you may just see your reflection, clearer than ever before. Story 12. The shadow that asked for love. There was a corridor in the temple that no one spoke about. It was narrow and dim, tucked behind the oldest wing where the floorboards creaked like weary bones. The light didn't quite reach its end, and, even in the daytime, a quiet chill lived there, like the breath of something forgotten. The novices called it the Shadow Hall. Most passed it quickly, eyes forward, robes brushing the walls. But one evening, just before dusk, a young woman named Nami stopped there. She stood at the threshold, her hand resting on the old wooden beam, her breath tight in her chest. It's just a hallway, she whispered to herself. But her body remembered. Otherwise, Nami had come to the monastery not from ambition, but desperation. She had suffered in silence for most of her life, wearing smiles that didn't reach her eyes, giving more than she received, hiding the parts of herself she feared others could not love. Inside her was a wound too old to name and too raw to ignore, a deep-rooted shame planted long ago, watered by unspoken trauma, and tended by the stories she had told herself to survive. I am too much. I am not enough. If they knew who I really was, they would leave. She was praised for her compassion, admired for her calm. But underneath her kindness lived a quiet terror, that she was not truly good. At night, in her cell, she would sometimes cry without sound, not because of something specific, but because of something missing, a connection, a self. Home within her own skin. The abbot had noticed. He did not question. He only gave her a lantern. There is a place in the temple, he said, that waits to be seen. Take this light. Go there. But do not go to change what you find. Go to listen. And so, Nami stood at the entrance to the shadow hall. She lit the lantern. The flame fluttered. Her heart pounded. Each step was a conversation between fear and courage. The floor creaked beneath her. The walls seemed to narrow. Shadows gathered around her feet like memories. And then she saw it. Her reflection. A full-length mirror stood at the end of the hallway. Old, dust-covered, cracked slightly at the top corner. It held her image like a question. She lifted the lantern, and in its light she saw herself. Not just the face she showed the world, but the eyes that had cried in silence, the mouth that had swallowed rage, the body that had carried weight never meant for her to hold. And standing just behind her, in the mirror's depth, a shadow. She gasped. Instinctively she stepped back, but the shadow did not vanish. It remained, not threatening, not monstrous, only watching. Nami trembled. "What are you?" she asked, and deep within her, a voice replied, "I am the part of you you tried to forget. I am your fear, your shame, your pain. I am not here to hurt you. I am here because I was hurt." Tears came, not of terror, but of recognition. Nami sank to her knees. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to love you." The shadow stepped forward and became light. Zen reflection. In Zen, we are taught not only to observe the present moment, but to embrace all that arises within it, even the parts we were taught to fear. The shadow in this story is not evil. It is not an enemy. It is the unloved self, the hidden child, the suppressed emotion, the unacknowledged truth. Zen does not divide the self into good and bad. It asks, can you be spacious enough to hold it all? Can you see the lotus growing from the mud? The shadow hall was never haunted. It was waiting, waiting for light, waiting for love. When Nami turned toward it, not to fix but to listen, transformation began. What was exiled became embraced. What was feared became integrated. This is the heart of Zen practice. Compassion without condition. Presence without preference. Psychological insight in modern psychology, particularly in the work of Carl Jung. The shadow represents the unconscious parts of ourselves we deny or reject, often due to shame, trauma, or early conditioning. These parts don't disappear. They manifest as inner critics. Repeated emotional patterns. Self-sabotage anxiety or depression shadow work is the process of bringing these parts into awareness with curiosity and care. Nami's experience mirrors what trauma-informed therapists guide clients through. Recognizing suppressed emotions, feeling without judgment, meeting the wounded inner child with love. When we avoid the shadow, it controls us from the dark. When we meet it, it becomes our teacher. The shadow doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for witnessing. Meditative closing tonight. Sit in a quiet place. Dim the lights. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly and gently ask, what part of me have I not loved? What emotion waits in the dark? Visualize holding a lantern. Walk through your inner hallway. When you see a shadow, pause. Do not banish it. Do not explain it away. Simply say, I see you. You are welcome here. The Buddha said, as a mother would protect her only child with her life, so must we extend boundless love to all beings, including ourselves. Your shadow is not your failure. It is your forgotten friend, and when you embrace it, you become whole. Story 13. The Moon in the Bowl. It was a night of perfect stillness. The temple gardens slept beneath the stars, and the moon, wide, round, impossibly clear, floated above the stone lanterns like a silent guardian. Its light draped over the gravel paths and brushed the moss with silver. Down by the old washing basin, the surface of the water was smooth as glass, and in it, the moon appeared whole. A small ceramic bowl rested nearby, used for evening ablutions, nothing special. But tonight, as novice Aiko bent to scoop water for her face, the moon caught her eye again. She paused. The bowl, filled halfway, now cradled the reflection of the moon. It fits, she whispered. The whole sky, in a single bowl. Aiko was not known for slowing down. She was bright, dedicated, eager, always the first to wake and last to retire. She excelled in memorizing sutras and performed her chores with near-obsessive perfection. But she struggled with stillness. Whenever she sat for meditation, her thoughts roared. Am I enough? Should I try harder? Why do others seem so serene? Underneath her devotion was a quiet hunger, not for praise, but for peace. She believed deep down that she was incomplete, that if she worked just a little harder, emptied herself a little more, purified her thoughts a little longer, maybe then she would finally be right. But tonight, something changed. It wasn't a teaching. It wasn't a revelation. It was just a bowl holding the moon. And suddenly, she wept. Not from sorrow, but from the quiet shock of realizing she, too, had always been enough to hold the light. The next morning, she brought the bowl to the abbot. She held it with both hands, as if offering a precious treasure. Master, she said softly, last night, the moon fit inside this bowl. The abbot nodded. He took the bowl, turned it gently in his palms, and looked at her with kind eyes. And did it fit better in your hands than in the sky? She shook her head. No. He smiled. Then perhaps the bowl did not contain the moon, but reflected it. And the same, he added, is true of your mind. Zen reflection. The moon is a beloved image in Zen. It represents truth, clarity, wholeness. The bowl represents the self, humble, ordinary, easily overlooked. Together, they reveal a teaching. You do not possess the truth, you reflect it. Zen does not ask us to become more. It asks us to be as we are, empty, open, aware. And in that space, light appears. Aiko's tears did not arise from sadness but from recognition. She had spent her days polishing, striving, chasing spiritual purity. But the moon did not need her effort. It only needed still water, just as awareness only needs presence. Psychological insight in modern psychology, especially in self-compassion theory and somatic psychotherapy, the constant drive to improve, the self is often rooted in an unmet need for belonging. We internalize the belief, I must be better to be loved. I must be perfect to be safe. I must perform to be accepted. This leads to chronic striving anxiety masked as productivity. Spiritual bypassing Aiko's transformation came not from doing more, but from pausing long enough to see what was already there. She realized that the peace she sought was not a goal. The clarity she chased was not distant. The truth she yearned for had always been reflected in her ordinary being. Like the moon in the bowl, wholeness is not added. It is recognized. Meditative closing, tonight. Find a small bowl. Fill it with water. Set it near a window. Let moonlight or starlight kiss the surface. Sit beside it. Do not wish for more. Do not seek to become. Just breathe. As you inhale, say, I am here. As you exhale, I am enough. Let the reflection be your reminder. You do not need to shine. You only need to receive. The Buddha said, like the moon, come out from behind the clouds, shine. But remember, even when hidden, the moon is whole, and so are you. Story 14. The man who waited for the lotus to shout. There was once a man who waited by the pond. Every morning he arrived before the sun. He sat on a flat stone near the edge of the water, back straight, eyes alert. He did not pray. He did not breathe with awareness. He simply watched, fixedly, stubbornly, the closed buds of the lotus flowers resting atop the green pads. He had one hope, one wish, one demand. I want to see it bloom, and when it blooms, it must speak. It must shout. It must tell me I've arrived. His name was Daijiro. No one knew exactly what had brought Daijiro to the monastery. He arrived in fine robes, with polished shoes and eyes like glass, clear but fragile. He spoke little, except to ask where the lotuses grew. The monks pointed him to the garden pond. He nodded, bowed slightly, and walked away without thanks. And then, every day, he came, to sit, to wait, to watch. He never helped with cooking, never swept the grounds, never chanted sutras. He only stared at the flower buds and waited for something extraordinary. When it opens, he said to a curious novice, I will be changed. The universe will speak. I will be awakened instantly. Days passed, then weeks. The lotuses swelled with the soft heat of early summer. One morning, a pink bloom opened. Slowly, quietly, Daijiro missed it. He had fallen asleep. When he awoke and saw the opened flower, he shook his head. No, he muttered. That cannot be it. It must be more. It must say something. He clenched his fists. Where is the voice? Where is the proof? He stayed longer that day, then longer. The next, he began to demand signs. He whispered mantras in different languages. He burned incense and stared harder. But the lotuses remained silent. They opened, they closed, they lived, they died, without spectacle, without permission, without performance. Eventually, an old monk sat beside him. He had seen Daijiro's silent struggle. He had watched many like him before, seekers addicted to arrival, souls starving for applause from the cosmos. The monk held out a bowl of rice. Daijiro waved it away. I don't need rice, I need awakening. The monk nodded. And perhaps it comes when you're not looking for it. Perhaps it comes when you are washing bowls, not waiting for thunder. Perhaps the lotus never shouts because it is already enough. Daijiro looked away. But how will I know I've arrived? The monk smiled. When you stop asking that question, Daijiro did not respond. But the next day, he helped in the kitchen, and the day after that, he joined the others in silent walking meditation. He still passed by the pond, but he no longer demanded. He bowed to the blooms, as if apologizing, and once, just once, he whispered, "You were speaking all along. I was too loud to hear." Zen reflection. Zen warns against the craving for satori, sudden enlightenment, as if it were a prize to be earned or an event to be orchestrated. The man in this story represents a common illusion, that awakening must be dramatic, that peace must arrive with fireworks, that happiness must come with certainty, clarity, applause. But the lotus never shouts. It blooms in silence, in mud, in its own time. Zen teaches us to let go of the seeking mind, the mind that says, I will be happy when, I will be whole if, I will be worthy once, and instead return to, I am here, I am breathing. This is enough. Psychological insight in modern psychology, especially in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. A central pattern of suffering is the chronic seeker. The person who continually believes fulfillment is always one step away. This mindset can come from unmet childhood needs perfectionism, cultural pressure to always improve, fear of stillness. It manifests as, addiction to achievement, restlessness in relationships, spiritual bypassing. Daijiro's frustration mirrors a common modern experience, chasing experiences, teachers, signs, only to feel emptier. The antidote is not to try harder, but to let go. When we release the grip of striving, we begin to notice the warmth of tea, the way the wind touches skin, the quiet hum of life in each moment. The lotus becomes visible not when it changes, but when we do. Meditative closing. Tonight, sit in silence. Imagine a pond, still, deep, reflecting stars. In the center, a lotus bud. It does not shout, it does not hurry, it simply opens. As you breathe in, say, "This moment is enough." As you breathe out, "I let go of striving." Feel your body soften. The Buddha said, "Do not seek the truth, only cease to cherish opinions." Let go of needing to be awakened. And notice, you already are. Not because a flower shouted, but because you finally listened. Story 15. The Garden Beneath the Ashes. The fire came in late summer. No one expected it. The forest had been dry, yes, brittle even, but the skies had stayed calm for weeks. Then one evening the wind changed. It turned warm and restless, and before night fully arrived, the horizon glowed red. The monks gathered what they could and evacuated up the mountain. When they returned the next day, the eastern grove was gone. The garden was gone, charred ground, smoke still rising. The ginkgo, trees that had shaded the path for a century, now stood black and hollow, their limbs reaching toward a sky that no longer recognized them. And in the middle of it all stood a woman in grey robes, barefoot, hands folded. Her name was Emma. Emma had once been a landscape architect, celebrated for her designs that blended water, stone, and stillness. Her gardens were places where people whispered without knowing why, where children became silent, watching koi fish swirl in golden spirals. But after her son died, a sudden illness, a fever that arrived and left in one long weekend, she could no longer bring herself to build anything, not with intention, not with love, not with belief. She wandered for months, she slept too much, she spoke too little. Then one day, she arrived at the temple and asked only for a broom. She was given a patch of rocky earth no one had touched in years. "Nothing grows there," a monk said. "Then it will be honest," Emma replied. She worked slowly, one stone at a time, one handful of dry moss. One prayer whispered without words. She didn't try to make it beautiful. She just listened. She listened to the soil, to the wind, to her own breath against the silence of morning. And in time, the patch of earth softened. A few weeds gave way to green. Birds began to land there. Butterflies paused. One by one, others began leaving small gifts, a fallen blossom, a smooth pebble, a folded note tucked beneath a stone. Then came the fire, and when it passed, all that remained was ash. The others mourned the loss of the garden, but Emma did not weep. She kneeled in the blackened soil the very next day and placed her hand over the earth. "It is still warm," she said. "That means it's still alive." They looked at her as if grief had broken her mind. But a month later, small green shoots began to rise, first thin, then thicker. Plants no one remembered planting. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in that region for years. And in the center of it all, the first ginkgo sprout. The ashes had become seedbed. The destruction had become womb. One morning, a novice asked her, "Why did you keep tending the earth? even after it burned. Emma looked toward the sky. Because the garden wasn't gone, she said. It just went underground. She placed her hand on her chest, the same way I did. Zen reflection. Zen does not deny destruction. It bows to it. Fire in Zen is not just an end. It is a return, a consuming force that reveals what cannot be burned. Emma's story reflects a central truth. Even when all appearances are lost, even when the form is gone, life remains, waiting, dormant, silent, but ready. The garden beneath the ashes is the soul that endures suffering. The green that grows again is awakening through grief. Zen teaches impermanence, yes, but also renewal. And true gardens are not planted once. They are planted again and again, each time with deeper humility. Psychological insight in trauma therapy and grief counseling, a concept known as post-traumatic growth has emerged. The idea that after significant suffering, people can experience not just recovery, but transformation. Emma's story mirrors that arc. The loss of her son stripped away meaning. Her healing began not through fixing, but through being with what remained. When her second loss came, the fire, she did not fall, because she had already learned that destruction does not erase life. Modern therapy supports what Zen has long known. Resilience is not resistance. True healing is not return to how things were, but becoming something new through the brokenness. Ash is not absence. It is the fertile ground of what comes next. Meditative closing tonight. Imagine a burned field, black, silent, empty of flowers. Now kneel in it. Place your hand on the ground. Feel the heat that still lingers. Feel the seed beneath it. As you breathe in, say, "Nothing is truly gone." As you breathe out, "Even now, something grows." The Buddha said, "As fire reduces wood to ash, so wisdom reduces illusion to clarity. Let your sorrow be ash. Let your loss be soil. Let your heart be the place where something brave rises again. The garden will return, not the same, but deeper, wiser, truer, and you will walk through it, barefoot, bowed and blooming." Story 16. The robe was too heavy. The robe hung in the small room like a cloud waiting to be worn. It was dark brown with long sleeves and deep folds. Worn smooth at the cuffs from years of prayer, it carried the scent of sandalwood and old pine, the scent of stillness. It had belonged to a revered monk named Senzan, who had passed away the previous winter after 70 quiet years of practice. Now the robe was to be passed down, and the abbot had chosen Kaito. Kaito was the youngest to receive it in a generation. Sharp-minded, fluent in sutras, capable of silent sitting for hours without moving. He had quickly become a model monk. Some said he was born for the robe. Others whispered envy. But Kaito only bowed and worked harder. When the abbot offered him the robe, Kaito accepted it with trembling hands. "Wear it when you are ready," the abbot said. "But remember, it is not the robe that must fit you. It is you who must become light enough to wear it." Kaito didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. The next morning, he put it on. It was heavier than he expected, not just in weight, but in feeling, as though the cloth had absorbed every silent vow, every moment of surrender, every ounce of humility from the one who wore it before. Kaito's back straightened, his breath deepened. He walked through the courtyard, and all eyes turned toward him with reverence. He bowed to everyone, spoke even more softly, sat even longer in meditation. But something began to shift. The robe changed how he walked, how he looked at others, how he looked at himself. He became careful, too careful, polished, controlled. Every movement calculated, every word edited, every expression tempered. He didn't laugh anymore. He avoided vulnerability, as if it might wrinkle the fabric. He began to feel distant from himself. One night, he walked to the edge of the woods behind the temple. The moon was low. The air was cold, and he sat alone, still wrapped in the robe that no longer felt like protection, but like armor. "Why am I so tired?" he whispered. "I'm doing everything right. Why does it feel like I'm disappearing?" And then, through the darkness, came the soft rustle of leaves. The abbot appeared, holding a bundle of firewood. He sat beside Kaito without a word. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you know why Senzan's robe was so light?" Kaito looked down at the sleeves hanging from his arms. "It doesn't feel light." The abbot smiled gently. Because he never tried to become Senzan. He only tried to become himself. The robe was light because he carried no image of who he should be. No performance, no comparison, no perfection. He placed a hand on Kaito's shoulder. "It's not your robe that's heavy, it's yourself." The next morning, Kaito folded the robe and placed it back on the hook in his room. He walked the temple grounds in his plain clothes, swept leaves with both hands, laughed when a bird startled him, forgot a verse of the Heart Sutra during chanting, and smiled. And that evening, when no one was watching, he returned to the room, bowed to the robe, and whispered, "When I no longer need to wear you to feel worthy, then I will wear you again." Zen reflection. In Zen, robes represent lineage, devotion, simplicity. But the teaching is always this: do not mistake the robe for the monk. Do not mistake the form for the essence. Spiritual ego is one of the subtlest traps on the path, the illusion that enlightenment is earned through performance, that stillness must look a certain way, that presence comes from posture. Zen asks us to shed all that, even the identity of practitioner, to be real, to be ordinary, to be no one in particular. Kaito's burden was not cloth. It was the pressure of becoming someone holy rather than someone whole. Psychological insight in modern psychology, especially in internal family systems, IFS, and psychodynamic therapy, we learn that people often develop protector identities, parts of themselves that perform for love, achievement, safety. Kaito's spiritual perfectionism is a mirror of the good child who pleases to feel accepted, the overachiever who seeks control through performance, the healer who hides his wounds beneath robes of wisdom. These roles may be rewarded externally, but internally they disconnect us from authenticity. True healing begins when we set down the costume, allow imperfection, let the self be raw, alive and flawed. As Carl Jung said, "I'd rather be whole than good." Meditative closing tonight. Close your eyes. Picture a robe hanging in a quiet room. It waits. It does not judge. It does not ask you to change. It only asks you to meet it as you are. As you breathe in, say, "I do not need to perform." As you breathe out, I return to what is true. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel the need to appear wise. Dissolve. The Buddha said, when you let go of who you are, you become who you might be. Let your robe rest, let your soul breathe, and trust that your presence, unguarded, unpolished, unfinished, is already the most sacred thing you carry. Story 17. When the bell rings twice. In the temple courtyard, the bell rang once to call the monks to meditation. Then, after a pause, it rang a second time. The first ring was tradition. The second was a signal. Only a few understood its meaning. Among them was an older monk named Tetsuya, who paused mid-step when he heard the second bell. He stood still for a breath, then turned around, removed his sandals, and walked back to his quarters. He knew what the second bell meant. It meant, not now. Sit with what you feel first. Come only when ready. The tradition had begun many years before, during a difficult winter. At the time, the abbot noticed that some monks, while diligent, arrived at the meditation hall with furrowed brows, clenched jaws, and hearts that beat not from clarity, but from tension. They meditated with effort, not openness. So he introduced the second bell, the first ring, a call to presence, the second, a permission to pause. If you're rushing, he said, don't come. If your mind is yelling, your body tight, your spirit aching, sit with that first. The Zendo will still be here. Not many took the offer, but Tetsuya did, and it changed everything. He had once been a corporate lawyer, sharp suits, constant travel, late nights, big wins. He came to the monastery after a panic attack in an airport. Lounge, heart racing, breath vanishing, a sense that the world was tilting. He had everything, yet felt like nothing. He stayed because of the silence. But it was the second bell that healed him. The first few times he heard it, he ignored it, eager to follow the rules, to do Zen right. But one morning, after a sleepless night of remembering his father's death, he arrived at the steps of the meditation hall and heard the second bell. He froze. The grief in his chest pulsed. The breath in his lungs caught. And for once, he didn't suppress it. He turned back, sat beneath the plum tree, and cried, not quietly, not stoically. He wept, as someone who had not given himself permission to feel for decades. From that day forward, the second bell became his teacher. He listened for it not only in the courtyard, but in his life. When his body tensed in conversations, when his jaw clenched as memories rose, when joy asked to be felt fully, when love wanted to speak, but he hesitated, he learned to pause, to wait, to let things ripen, to not push forward until his heart was ready. He told a novice once, the first bell is the world's voice, the second is your own. Zen reflection in Zen, pausing is not laziness. It is wisdom. The world rushes toward achievement, toward answers, toward appearances. But Zen says, sit, wait. Let the tea steep. Let the moon rise. Let the water settle. The bell that rings twice is not an external rule. It is an invitation inward, to listen, to feel, to be honest about what is moving within. Tetsuya did not become awakened through effort. He became free by learning when not to try. This is the subtle art of timing, knowing when to proceed and when to bow to the moment instead. Psychological insight in modern therapeutic practice, especially in somatic and mindfulness-based therapies. The nervous system is seen as a guide, often more honest than the mind. When we override its signals, we suffer. Burnout, anxiety disconnection from Self-Tetsuya's journey, mirrors the importance of attunement. The second bell represents emotional boundaries, self-awareness, permission to not push through. Healing often requires this pause. Before reacting, before forcing, before performing in therapy, clients are taught to ask, am I ready? What does my body need? Can I be with what is before trying to change it? This pause, simple, subtle, is where true integration begins. Meditative closing tonight. Imagine a bell. It rings once, calling you to awareness. Then it rings again, inviting you to pause. Close your eyes. Breathe in. I hear the first bell. Breathe out. I choose the second. Let yourself sit, not to achieve, not to improve, but to simply be. The Buddha said, if you are unable to find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The truth waits. Sometimes it rings once, and sometimes it waits for you to hear the second bell. Wait with it, rest with it, and when it is time to rise, you will know, because your heart will rise with you. Story 18. The Child and the Ant. The ant was small, almost invisible. It moved slowly across the worn wooden plank of the temple's back porch, weaving its way through the cracks, undisturbed, unseen, until a small child knelt beside it, face close to the earth, eyes wide. Her name was Kana. She was 6 years old, and she had come to the monastery not as a student, but as a guest, the granddaughter of a lay practitioner visiting for the season's end. She didn't understand Zen. She didn't chant. She couldn't sit still for more than a few breaths. But she saw the ant, and for an entire hour she followed it. The monks watched her from a distance. They whispered among themselves, some amused, some annoyed. Children were rare in the temple. Their world was one of silence and formality, and Kana's presence felt like a drop of dye in a clear bowl of water. But the abbot watched silently, then, finally, smiled. She is doing what we forget to do, he said. She is seeing. Kana followed the ant as it crossed the porch, then a stone step, then disappeared into a crack between two paving tiles. She gasped when she lost sight of it, then giggled when it reappeared on the other side. She offered it a crumb of rice from her sleeve. It ignored her. She whispered, "Where are you going, little one?" The ant, of course, didn't answer. But she imagined it did. She imagined it had a home, a purpose, a story. And in that imagining, her face lit with joy, the kind of joy not explained, only felt. Later that evening, during tea, Kana sat beside the abbot and told him all about the ant. He was very busy, she said, but also very polite. I think he liked me. The abbot nodded. Did he teach you anything? He asked. She tilted her head. Yes, she said softly. He didn't hurry, but he didn't stop either. The abbot closed his eyes and breathed in slowly. Then you have understood today's teaching. Zen reflection. In Zen, the teachings are not confined to cushions and sutras. They are found in the flight of birds, in the falling of leaves, in the steps of an ant. The great master Dogen once said, "If you cannot find the truth where you are, where else do you expect to find it?" Kana's encounter with the ant is not a child's game. It is the beginning of awakening. Children live in presence. They don't demand life to be different. They don't overthink. They simply see. But as we grow, we learn to rush, categorize, distract, dismiss Zen. Practice is the gentle art of remembering. How to kneel beside the ant. How to see with wonder. How to let things be in that kneeling, the world opens. Psychological insight in psychology, especially in the field of inner child work and mindfulness-based therapy, a common theme arises. Healing begins when we reconnect with wonder. The adult mind often overcomplicates, overanalyzes, suppresses curiosity in favor of control. But the child's mind is open, flexible, joyfully unknowing. Karna's simple act, watching an ant for an hour, would be labeled wasteful in many adult contexts, but therapeutically, it is deep engagement with the present. Clients are often invited to name what they see, reconnect with play slow down to the speed of breath. The ant becomes a symbol, a mirror of what is simple, small, and miraculous. We don't need more information. We need more seeing. Meditative closing tonight. Close your eyes. Imagine an ant moving slowly across a stone path. You kneel to watch. You do not name it. You do not judge it. You simply observe. As you breathe in, say, I return to wonder. As you breathe out, I kneel before the present. Let your mind be small. Let your heart be wide. Let your attention be soft, like a child watching the world without agenda. The Buddha said, in the seeing, just the seen. In the hearing, just the heard. Return to just this. The ant, the step, the breath. And perhaps, just like Cana, you'll realize the ant wasn't small. We were simply looking too far ahead to see it. Story 19. The pebble in the sandal. He walked with a slight limp. It wasn't visible at first. His posture was upright, his steps measured. But after the third circuit around the temple garden, anyone watching closely would have noticed it. A subtle hesitation in the left foot, a tilt in the hip, a flicker of tightness across the brow. The man's name was Riku. He had come to the monastery during the last weeks of summer, seeking peace. He claimed to be fine. He smiled when spoken, too. He bowed just deeply enough, but he walked with pain. The monks assumed it was an old injury, perhaps a sprain or tendon strain. Riku said nothing of it. He bore it in silence as if it were shameful. Day after day, he participated in kinhin, the walking meditation. One step. Breathe. Another step. Breathe. But every step carried a wince. Until, one morning, as he circled the courtyard alone, the abbot stepped in front of him with a simple question. Have you checked your sandal? Riku blinked. My sandal, the abbot nodded. Take it off. Riku hesitated, confused, but he obeyed. Inside the left sandal, near the arch, was a tiny pebble, no larger than a grain of rice. Sharp at the edges, he stared at it. That's it? He whispered. That small thing has been... The abbot smiled gently. Small things shape long journeys. That afternoon, Riku sat by the koi pond with the pebble in his hand. He turned it over slowly, studying its ridges as if it were a sacred relic. Tears welled in his eyes, not because of the pebble, but because of what it revealed. He had spent years in discomfort, not in his body, but in his heart. A fight with his brother that had never been resolved. A marriage that had become performance. A career he no longer believed in. He had told himself, it's not that bad. Just push through. Everyone carries something. And so he did, until the weight of one small thing became the echo in every step. That evening, Riku placed the pebble on the altar, not as an offering, but as a reminder. What we ignore he whispered, becomes the rhythm of our lives. Zen reflection. Zen is a path of subtlety. It teaches us that the great truths are found not in thunder, but in breath. Not in catastrophe, but in the unnoticed discomfort that repeats. The pebble in the sandal is not dramatic, but it shapes how we walk. It shapes how we think, how we react, how we love. Riku's limp was not weakness. It was wisdom waiting to be heard. Zen asks us to pay attention to our gait, to our habits, to the whispers in our silence. The question is not, what is wrong with me? But, what am I carrying that I haven't looked at? To notice is to begin liberation. Psychological insight in psychotherapy, especially somatic and trauma-informed modalities, we know that small unresolved pain can lead to chronic tension, emotional dysregulation, disconnection from authentic self. Often, the issue isn't the magnitude of the pain, but its invisibility. Clients may come in with symptoms: anxiety with no clear cause, relationship fatigue, body pain with no medical diagnosis, and through gentle exploration, a pebble is discovered. A hurtful comment never healed. A betrayal left unspoken. A need unmet in childhood. Riku's limp mirrors how the body holds stories. Healing begins when we take off the sandal, investigate the pain, hold it with curiosity. Instead of shame, it's rarely too late to walk differently. Meditative closing tonight. Sit quietly. Close your eyes. Picture your journey, the long path you've walked. Now ask, is there a pebble in my sandal? What discomfort have I been ignoring? Breathe in. I am willing to look. Breathe out. I am safe to feel. Visualize removing the pebble. Hold it in your hand. Thank it for protecting you, for reminding you. Then place it down. The Buddha said, "Nothing can harm you more than your own unguarded thoughts, and nothing can heal you more than your awareness of them. Walk again, not faster, not farther, but freer, and let your footsteps be lighter." Story 20. The monk who forgot the mantra. He had chanted the same mantra for 15 years. Every morning before sunrise, every evening before the stars began to bloom, Jiro's voice rose and fell like a river. Fluid, unwavering, precise, the syllables shaped his breath, his posture, his very identity. People said he recited like the wind through bamboo. Gentle, effortless, eternal. They came to the monastery not for guidance, but to sit near him, to feel the stillness he seemed to carry, to watch his lips move in rhythm with something deeper than language. Jiro was proud, though he would never have said so. His robe was plain. His bow was low. But inside, he held tightly to one thing. I am the one who remembers. Then, one morning, his voice stopped. He stood before the altar, as always. He opened his mouth, but the words were gone. Not jumbled, not blurred. Gone. He paused, took a breath, tried again. Silence. It was not a stroke, not illness. The physician found nothing wrong. His memory returned for everything else. Names, sutras, tasks, just not the mantra. He hid it for days. Mouth moving without sound, eyes closed as if in devotion. But inside, he was unraveling. How can I serve if I cannot? Remember, what am I without this sacred rhythm? What is left when the form disappears? One evening, as the lanterns were being lit, the abbot approached. "You've been very quiet lately," he said. Jiro bowed low, ashamed. "I've lost the mantra," he confessed. The abbot was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. Now, let us see what remains." Jiro sat in the meditation hall that night, without chanting. At first, he felt naked, exposed without his mantra, like a tree without bark. He could hear others reciting, their voices forming the shape of tradition. But he sat in silence, not resisting, not pretending, just listening. And in that quiet, something unexpected arrived. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a thought. It was breath, slow, steady, unformed, undemanding. Then sensation, the warmth of his hands in his lap, the way his spine curved into the cushion, the soft knock of his own heartbeat. He had spent years wrapped in syllables, but now without them he heard something else. Presence. The next day he did not return to the altar. He went to the garden instead. He pulled weeds, touched the soil, watered a struggling lily. A novice passed and asked him, "Aren't you missing your practice?" Jiro looked up, eyes shining with calm. "No," he said. "I'm just learning how to listen again." Zen reflection. In Zen, mantras are not magic. They are tools, like boats to cross a river, maps to find a trail. But once the river is crossed, the boat is left behind. Once the trail is walked, the map fades into memory. Jiro's forgetting was not a loss. It was a return. The mind clings to form, words, techniques, roles, identities. But Zen asks, who are you before the mantra? Who are you when there is nothing left to remember? In the absence of sound, the truth revealed itself. Mantras can guide, but silence awakens. Psychological insight in mindfulness-based therapies, especially ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, clients often become attached to strategies, breathing exercises, affirmations, routines to regulate anxiety or distress. These are helpful, but sometimes healing requires letting go of the method and entering the raw experience without scaffolding. Jiro's mantra was a structure. It gave him identity, safety, rhythm. But over time, it became a mask, a performance that disconnected him from direct experience. His forgetting allowed him to sit with discomfort, rediscover sensory presence, realize that being is enough. This mirrors a critical shift in therapy, from doing mindfulness to being mindful. Healing happens not through mastery, but through humility, through surrender to what is, without tools or terms. Meditative closing tonight. Sit in silence. Do not chant. Do not label. Do not try. Just be. Feel your breath move in and out. Feel your body resting on the ground. Notice the space between thoughts. As you inhale, say softly, I let go of form. As you exhale, I return to presence. Do not search for meaning. Let meaning arrive on its own. The Buddha said, silence is sometimes the best answer. And sometimes, when the mantra is gone, the wind returns, the breath speaks, the stillness sings, and in that silence, you may find the voice that was always yours. Story 21. The bird that sang at dusk. The bird began to sing as the light began to fade. It wasn't the high, cheerful call of morning, nor the chatter of midday flocks. It was a single note, low, slow, uncertain, drawn out into the hush of the coming night. It came from a crooked branch of the tallest cedar behind the temple kitchen. No one knew its name. No one had ever seen its wings clearly. But each dusk, as the sun dipped below the ridge and the last shadows stretched like ink across the stones, the bird sang. And always, someone listened. This time, it was Masaki. Masaki was old. His back curved like the mountain paths he once climbed with ease. His hair had thinned to wisps of silver, and his hands trembled now when he lifted the teacup. But his eyes were still clear, not with sharpness, but with peace. He had lived at the temple for 30 years. Once a surgeon, precise, ambitious, sought after, he had walked away after a single moment changed everything. A hand that failed to stop the bleeding, a breath that did not return. I saved many, he told the abbot that night, but the one I lost follows me. The abbot simply nodded and said, "Then sit with him. There is space enough here for the living and the gone." And so Masaki stayed. He never sought ordination, never led teachings, but he became the one everyone turned to when silence needed company. And every evening, without fail, he sat beneath the cedar and listened to the bird's song. That day, the bird began its call later than usual. Masaki had already settled on his bench. His joints ached. His chest felt tight, not painfully, but with a quiet pressure he had come to recognize. "Ah," he whispered. "So this is the edge." He did not fear death. He feared unfinished things, unspoken words, unloved parts of himself, unanswered, questions left dangling like autumn leaves. But he breathed through the fear, and then the bird sang. Soft, thin, beautiful. He closed his eyes and whispered to no one. "I'm listening." The next morning they found him still sitting. His hands were folded gently in his lap, his face tilted slightly upward, his lips parted just enough to catch the last note of the world. And beside him, on the stone step, a single feather, small, grey, weightless. No one heard the bird that evening, but no one needed to. Zen reflection, in Zen, endings are not failures. They are not interruptions. They are part of the rhythm. The bird that sings at dusk is not crying. It is completing. Masaki's story is not about death. It is about presence, the kind that listens fully, even to the final. Note: Zen does not rush farewell. It bows to it, sits with it, listens to the silence that follows. In the Heart Sutra, we recite, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So too is the breath, rising, falling, returning. So too is life, beginning, fading, becoming again." Psychological insight in grief counseling and end-of-life therapy, a key theme arises. The deepest peace comes not from avoiding death, but from making meaning within it. Masaki's journey reflects the process of integration, reconciliation, acceptance. Modern psychology teaches that death becomes terrifying when we resist it. Healing comes from presence, not distraction. Legacy is built in attention, not achievement. The bird's song at dusk is a metaphor for the final chapters of life, not loud, not certain, but deeply meaningful. We do not control when the song ends, but we can choose to hear it fully. Meditative closing. Tonight, sit quietly, turn off the lights, let the dusk find you. Imagine a small bird perched on a branch. Its song begins, soft, slow, beautiful. As you breathe in, say, I hear what fades. As you breathe out, I sit with what ends. Let the silence after the song be your teacher. The Buddha said, "Of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Of all contemplations, the remembrance of death is supreme. Not to fear it, but to honor it." Masaki did not run from his ending. He listened. He bowed. He became the stillness that follows the song. And in that stillness, he was free. Story 22. The river does not keep the fish. The river never stopped. It curved around the temple grounds like a silver thread, sometimes rushing, sometimes still. In summer, it swelled with snowmelt. In winter, it whispered under thin sheets of ice. Monks came to wash robes in it. Children came to float paper lanterns. Lovers once stood on its banks in secret, their vows dissolving like mist at sunrise. But no one came as often as Yuna. She sat on the flat rock by the bend each morning, a fishing line resting loosely in her fingers. She didn't bait it. She wasn't trying to catch anything. She simply liked the feeling of holding something that didn't need to be held tightly. It had been 3 months since Akira left. They had spent nearly 6 years together, first as university students, exchanging books, then as partners running a small cafe nestled between temples in Kyoto. They had laughed, built routines, planted a plum tree in a shared pot on the balcony. But like all rivers, time moved forward. And one morning, Akira woke and said, "I think we've come to the part where we must let go." He said it kindly, gently, without blame. And Yuna, who always believed in clarity, found herself speechless. She came to the temple not for healing, but for practice. Not the kind on cushions, but the kind found in rivers. The first days, she cried. The next, she wrote letters she never sent. By the second week, she found the fishing pole and began to sit and wait, not for Akira, but for the part of herself that could watch love float away and not become empty. One morning, a young monk sat beside her. He watched the line in silence, then asked, "Why do you keep coming if you don't fish?" Yuna smiled, eyes on the current. "Because sometimes the heart is like the river, and sometimes the people we love are like the fish." She paused. "You don't catch them, you don't trap them. You just watch them pass and give thanks for the moment they swam near." She didn't speak of Akira again. But a few weeks later, she folded a paper boat, placed it on the water, and watched it drift. Not toward an ending, but into release. Zen reflection in Zen. Attachment is the root of suffering. Not because love is wrong, but because clinging misunderstands the nature of things. The river teaches impermanence. It does not hold. It flows. And in that flow, everything belongs, and nothing is possessed. The fish swims freely, and still we are blessed to witness it. Yuna's practice was not to forget Akira. It was to remember him without holding, to bow to the love they shared, to let it move downstream, to remain whole. Psychological insight. In psychological terms, Yuna's journey reflects the process of grief integration, the emotional and cognitive restructuring that follows a loss, especially relational loss. Attachment theory teaches that loss triggers primal fear of abandonment. The mind clings to what was to preserve safety. Letting go feels like losing identity. But modern relational therapy emphasizes love does not need possession to be real. Release can deepen, not erase, the connection. Emotional completion happens through presence. Not erasure, Yuna's river became a metaphor for non-attachment. She did not numb herself. She did not idolize Akira. She sat with what was and watched it become what is. This is healing. Not forgetting, but flowing forward. Meditative closing. Tonight, sit by an imagined river. Let its waters pass quietly before you. Breathe in. I loved. Breathe out. I release. Watch the memories float, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with gratitude. The Buddha said, "You can only lose what you cling to, so offer the fish your open palm. Let it swim, let it go, and know, the river still flows through you, and you are still whole." Story 23. The lantern that lit itself. The lantern sat untouched in the meditation hall's far corner. Its paper was thin, yellowed with time, and one side had begun to tear. The wooden frame leaned slightly, like an old man who had bowed too long. A small flint box rested beneath it, worn smooth from countless failed strikes. The monks had stopped lighting it years ago. They said the wick was too old. They said the light no longer held. Still, it remained, waiting. A new resident came to the temple that spring. Her name was Chie. She was not a nun, nor a seeker in the traditional sense. She had no spiritual questions, no desire for wisdom. She had come simply because she had nowhere else to go. A year ago, she had tried to take her own life. There had been pills, a note, a silence that lingered too long before someone knocked. She survived, but barely, and now she lived in the kind of twilight where nothing burned. Not passion, not anger, not joy, just the ache of being alive when she had already said goodbye. She didn't join the chants. She didn't sit in formal posture. She swept floors, tended to the compost, slept early, spoke little. But each night when the hall emptied, she sat near the forgotten lantern. She didn't know why. Perhaps because it, too, seemed discarded, not broken, not gone, just waiting, like her. One night, the wind howled. The candles flickered out one by one. Chie stayed behind, alone. She reached for the flint, more out of instinct than hope. She struck it once. No spark. Again. Nothing. She sighed, then whispered aloud, to the dark, "Maybe you don't want to light. Maybe I don't either." She closed her eyes. But then, faintly, a glow. She opened them to find the lantern lit. No one saw her cry, not out of sadness, but because something inside her, quiet and hidden, had also flickered to life. The next morning, the monks found her sitting beside the lantern, eyes wide with stillness. "It lit itself," she said. They smiled, thinking it symbolic, but she knew better. It had lit itself the moment she stopped trying to force the light. Zen reflection. In Zen, light is not always external. The flame we seek, guidance, meaning, warmth, often appears only when we surrender the need to find it. The unlit lantern is the self during despair, whole but forgotten, capable, but closed waiting. But unloved Chi's healing did not come through teaching. It came through silence, through sitting beside her own unlit heart and not demanding that it shine. The lantern lit, not because she fixed it, but because she befriended its darkness. Zen teaches the light is not outside you. It has always been here, covered, yes, but not gone. To stop searching is not to give up. It is to finally arrive. Psychological insight in depression therapy, particularly existential and acceptance-based approaches, healing often comes not from solutions, but from companionship with the dark. Clients describe numbness, disconnection, a sense of being hollow. The temptation is to fix, wursi, hai, to force positivity, to demand a return to light. But therapists know, the more we chase light, the more we fear the dark. The more we resist despair, the more it grows. Chi's moment of awakening mirrors a therapeutic turning point. She did not force hope. She sat beside her emptiness, without judgment. This allowed a spark, not from flint, but from within. True recovery often begins not with a blaze, but a flicker. Meditative closing tonight. Imagine a paper lantern. It is old, unlit, waiting. Sit beside it. Place your hand near its base. As you breathe in, say, I do not fear my darkness. As you breathe out, I sit with it. Do not ask the lantern to glow. Do not beg the light to return. Just be there. And if one day, when least expected, a glow begins to rise, welcome it as a friend long misunderstood. The Buddha said, thousands of candles can be lit from a single flame, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. But sometimes, the first flame must come from within. Story 24. The mirror with no dust. The mirror had not been touched in years. It was kept behind a sliding panel in the corner of the old study hall, wrapped in thin rice paper, resting atop a wooden frame that no longer stood straight. The monks called it the truth glass, half in jest, half in reverence. No one used it, not because they feared it, but because in the temple one learned to look inward without needing reflections. But some things cannot be avoided forever, and one morning a monk named N went looking for his face. N had always struggled with mirrors. Even before he entered the monastery, he avoided them. Hotel bathroom mirrors, shop windows, even the dark shine of his laptop screen. Not because he was vain, but because he feared what he would see. A fraud, a failure, a face shaped by fear and never enough. He had grown up in a family where appearance was everything. The right schools, the correct posture, the flawless presentation. Praise came only when perfect. Love came conditionally, and so he learned early. You are not to be known, you are to be shown. When he shaved his head for ordination, he had not looked in the mirror once, not even as the last strands fell. Not even when the senior monk wiped his forehead with a warm cloth and whispered, "Now you begin." For 5 years, Ain lived sincerely. He practiced hard, sat long hours, memorized the sutras, served tea with grace, recited chants from memory. But still, a restlessness clung to him, a quiet ache, not in the body, but behind the eyes, as if he had never truly seen himself. And so, on that grey morning, he slid open the cabinet. He unwrapped the paper, lifted the mirror with trembling hands, and placed it in front of him. Dust had settled in the corners. A small crack veined down one side. He stared. At first, all he saw was discomfort. The shape of his nose, the uneven lines around his mouth, the rawness in his eyes. Then shame arose. You're supposed to be past this. 5 years, and still you're obsessed with image, still so attached. But then, silence. And in that silence, something else. A presence. Not the monk, not the seeker, not the wound, just a human. Breathing, looking, being. He blinked, and the mirror blinked back. Later that day, he told the abbot what he had done. The abbot nodded. "And what did you see?" he asked. N thought for a long moment. "Nothing new," he said. "And everything I had forgotten." The abbot smiled. "That mirror," he said, "is like the mind. When you stop trying to clean it, it shows you what was always there." Zen reflection. In Zen, the mirror is a powerful symbol. It reflects, it reveals, but it does not judge. Our true nature, what Zen calls the original face, cannot be damaged. It is not the ego, not the story, not the image in the world's eyes. It is the self before the self. Before the name, before the shame, before the mirror ever arrived, Zen master Huineng said, "Originally, there is not a single thing. Where can dust alight?" An's healing came not from polishing the mirror, but from finally allowing it to be still, to reflect without resistance. That is the art of awakening, not becoming pure, but recognizing we were never impure to begin with. Psychological insight. In self-image psychology and depth-oriented therapy, the mirror represents self-perception, internalized expectations. The tension between authentic and social self-An's journey mirrors the process of disidentifying with false self-concepts. He spent years constructing a persona, even in spiritual practice. But healing began when he confronted the mirror without agenda. Therapists know. Clients struggle most not with reality, but with what they believe about themselves. Shame distorts. Compassion reveals. When clients are invited to see themselves truly, gently, they begin to forgive, integrate, reconnect. The mirror then becomes not a judge, but a witness. Meditative. Closing tonight. Find a mirror. Sit with it, not to inspect, not to fix, but to simply be seen. Let your breath be steady. Let your gaze be soft. As you inhale, say, "I see." As you exhale, "I accept." Look beyond features, beyond flaws, and if shame arises, greet it. "I know you. You protected me. You may rest." The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Let your reflection return home. Let the dust remain, for the mirror never needed to shine, only to reflect, and so do you." Story 25. The gate that was never locked. For as long as he could remember, Sora believed he was trapped. He could not say exactly where the prison began, only that it was always there. A sense of something held tight around his life. Not a cage of iron, not a wall of stone, but something softer, subtler. Rules, expectations, the invisible weight of being a certain way. He grew up in a quiet family, not cruel, but controlled. Things were spoken indirectly, smiles were earned. Desire was softened into duty, and so, from childhood, Sora learned to behave, to succeed, to fit, to wait. He waited through school. He waited through love that felt more like agreement. He waited through a job that paid well, but left his chest hollow by lunchtime. Until one morning, he looked out the window of his 10th floor apartment and whispered, "Is this my life, or just the path of least resistance?" That night, he packed a small bag and walked away. He arrived at the monastery uncertain, unshaved, unspoken. He expected to be turned away. Instead, he was greeted by a woman sweeping dust from the steps. She looked at him for only a moment and said, "You've come far. Come closer. He stayed. He worked in the gardens, ate in silence, folded linens with trembling hands. Each day, a little more of the noise faded, but the feeling of being trapped did not. It followed him like a second skin. An idea, a tightness in the chest, the faint echo of a voice that whispered, "You cannot be free, not yet, not ever." 1. Afternoon, while gathering fallen branches near the forest edge, he came upon an old wooden gate. It stood between two stone markers covered in ivy. The hinges were rusted, the wood soft from rain and time. A rope looped over the latch, loosely tied. It looked ancient, sacred, forgotten. He stared at it. Something in him stirred. A longing, a fear, a question. He reached for the rope, pulled it aside. The gate creaked open with a groan. No lock. No resistance. Only the sound of something misunderstood. Giving way. He stepped through. On the other side, nothing changed. Not the trees, not the wind, not the color of the sky, but inside him. Everything shifted. He fell to his knees. "It was never locked," he whispered. "Not once, not ever." And he began to cry. Not because he had been fooled, but because he had held himself prisoner for so long. He returned to the temple different. He laughed more, walked barefoot, cooked slowly, listened deeply. Someone once asked what he had found beyond the gate. He smiled and said, "Myself," without the story. Zen reflection. Zen, the final barrier is not external. It is mind-made, a veil woven from memory, fear, identity. We believe, "I am not ready. I am not allowed. I must earn freedom." But Zen whispers otherwise. The door is open. It always has been. The gate that was never locked is the illusion of separation. From peace, from presence, from our true nature. Sora's realization was not about a gate in the woods. It was the moment he stopped believing the voice of inner conditioning and stepped into what already was. Zen master Rinzai once said, "If you want to be free, turn your attention inward. Who is binding you?" The answer is never out there. The gate is not the barrier. The belief is psychological insight. In psychological terms, Sora's story reflects the core of internalized limitation. Clients often describe feeling stuck, trapped, caged. But when explored, the bars are made of old narratives, fear of rejection, perfectionism, guilt for wanting more therapy helps to name these internal gates. Examine who put them there. Discover they are often unlatched. The turning point is not external permission. It is inner permission. Sora didn't find freedom. He realized he already was free, but hadn't yet stepped through the idea of being trapped. This is liberation. Gentle, quiet, yours. Meditative closing tonight. Sit in silence. Picture a gate. Old, wooden, weathered. You stand before it. Ask yourself, what story says I cannot pass? Who told me I must wait? Now reach forward. Untie the rope. Open the gate. Step through. As you breathe in, I am not trapped. As you breathe out, I am already free. The Buddha said, the way is not in the sky. The way is in the heart. So, walk the heart path. Step beyond the stories, beyond the gate, into the life that was always waiting for you. And in that step, soft, barefoot, honest, you return home. You've just journeyed through 25 Zen stories, not as a listener, but as a soul returning to its own quiet rhythm. If something in these stories touched you, if a single phrase settled in your chest like breath, if for even one moment you felt seen, softened, or simply present, then we've shared something sacred. This is the empty boat, a space where silence teaches, stories heal, and the ordinary becomes holy again. Now, we invite you to bring your voice into this quiet river. Share with us in the comments which story lingered in your heart, what moment made you pause, what truth rose to the surface as you listened. If these stories brought comfort, share them with someone you love, someone in need of stillness, of clarity, of gentle light. And if you'd like to float with us further, subscribe to The Empty Boat, where each story is a lantern, each pause is a practice, and each video is an invitation. Not to change yourself, but to come home to who you already are. Thank you for sitting with us. May peace walk beside you, and may you always remember, the boat is empty. That's why it floats.